My name is Charlotte Evans, and if someone had told me 10 years ago that my parents would one day depend on me, the daughter they once dismissed, I would have laughed in disbelief. Yet here I am, sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking downtown Chicago, the city lights glittering like 1,000 reminders that life has a twisted sense of humor. The silk of my blouse feels cool against my skin as I lean back in my chair, the weight of my own silence pressing heavier than the late-night reports stacked neatly on my desk. I had just signed off on a partnership worth millions, but the real victory was quieter, sharper, like a private smile I refused to let the world see. Then my phone buzzed. A single vibration, followed by a name on the screen I never expected to see again.
Mom.
For a moment, my chest tightened, memories rushing back like the taste of bitterness I thought I had long outgrown. I hadn't heard her voice in years. Not since the day she and my father turned their backs on me, their disappointment echoing louder than any slammed door. I let the phone ring once.
Twice.
By the third ring, I couldn't look away anymore. My perfectly polished nails tapped the mahogany desk, betraying the calm facade I wore so well.
Why now?
Why after all these years? As the ringing stopped, a voicemail notification blinked. I closed my eyes, breathing in the faint scent of coffee lingering from earlier, steadying myself. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew what that message would contain. The daughter they once refused was now the woman they needed. I was 21 when everything unraveled. Back then, I was still living in my parents' modest two-story house in the suburbs of Ohio. I remember standing in the kitchen, the scent of Dad's aftershave mixing with the sharp bitterness of freshly brewed coffee. My hands trembled as I clutched the envelope I had worked so hard to fill. 3 months of tips from waiting tables, extra shifts at the bookstore, and even selling sketches I made late at night. It wasn't much, but it was enough to help with the mortgage that was slipping behind, enough to cover groceries Mom kept rationing, enough to show I could contribute. Dad. I started, sliding the envelope across the counter. I know it's not a lot, but please, let me help. He didn't even look at it. His jaw tightened, the lines around his mouth sharper than usual. Charlotte, we don't need charity from our own daughter. Mom's voice was softer, but cut deeper. You should focus on your studies, not this. You're young. You don't understand how the world works. Her words stung. I did understand. I understood the way she looked at empty cupboards, the way Dad stared at unopened bills, the way silence settled over dinner like a heavy curtain. But I'm part of this family too, I whispered, my throat thick, tears pressing against the back of my eyes. I can help. Dad pushed the envelope back toward me, his hand firm, final. We said no. I stood there, the rejection ringing louder than his voice. My fingers curled around the envelope, knuckles white, shame burning hot in my chest. That night, I sat on my bed, the weight of their dismissal pressing down harder than the cracked ceiling above me. I felt invisible, like a child who would never be trusted, no matter how hard she tried. It was then my grandmother's words echoed in my mind, words she had once whispered while braiding my hair when I was a little girl. Don't wait for anyone to see your worth, Charlotte. Build it so strong they can't ignore it. I reached for the small silver locket she had given me before she passed. Inside was a faded photo of her younger self, smiling with a confidence I longed to claim. That night, staring at that locket, I made a promise. If my parents didn't believe in me, I would believe in myself. And that was the first step toward walking away. Leaving home wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some cinematic scene of me marching out with a suitcase and a confident smile. No, it was me sitting on a Greyhound bus with 2 duffel bags, a notebook filled with sketches, and $87 tucked in my wallet. My parents didn't even come to the station. Chicago became my battlefield. The city was cold and unwelcoming at first, the skyscrapers towering over me like silent judges. I rented a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a heater that coughed more than it worked. Nights were long and quiet, except for the hum of traffic that seeped through the cracked window pane. I worked days at a coffee shop and nights doing freelance design work online. At first, the jobs paid in pennies, logos for small businesses, flyers for birthday parties. But every project felt like a seed. I sketched until my wrists ached, learning the software, teaching myself branding, pushing through tutorials on an old secondhand laptop that overheated whenever I pushed it too far. The turning point came when a woman named Margaret Lewis walked into the coffee shop. She was a regular, mid-40s, sharp suits, always in a hurry. One evening, she noticed me sketching between orders. "You drew that?" she asked, tilting her head at the design on my notepad. I froze, embarrassed. "Yeah, just ideas." She studied it for a moment, then smiled in a way that made me sit up straighter. "You've got talent. Come see me at my office tomorrow. I might have a project for you." That project turned into a contract. That contract turned into a portfolio. Margaret became my mentor, the first person in years who didn't just see me as a girl trying too hard. She saw me as a woman with vision. But the journey wasn't smooth. There were nights I cried into my pillow after clients dismissed me, after emails went unanswered. There were mornings I questioned if I had made a mistake walking away from my family, if maybe they were right. I didn't understand how the world worked. Yet every setback fueled me. Every rejection became proof that I could still stand. Slowly, my small wins grew larger. I signed my first corporate client, a small but rising fashion brand that used my designs on their storefront. Seeing my work lit up in neon on Michigan Avenue felt like a silent victory lap. I never told my parents. On the rare occasions they called, I kept my words vague. "I'm doing fine," I'd say. "Just busy with work." They never asked for details, and I never offered. It was easier to let them believe I was just scraping by. Inside, though, I was building something bigger than I ever imagined. By the time I turned 27, I wasn't just designing logos. I was running my own creative agency, with a team of 10 brilliant minds working beside me. We rented a sleek office downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble floors, the kind of place that screamed success even before you sat down. But behind all the growth, behind the polished smile I wore in every client meeting, I carried a quiet secret. My success wasn't just mine. It was the echo of every time I'd been told no, every slammed door, every rejection. And one day, I knew those echoes would come back full circle. The voicemail from my mother lingered in my inbox for hours before I finally pressed play. Her voice was shaky, the same voice that used to scold me for not cleaning my room or for coming home late from the library. But this time, it carried a tremor I had never heard before. "Charlotte, it's your father. He's not doing well. We need help. Please call me back." For a long while, I just sat there, staring out at the city. The skyline was bathed in golden light, cars below moving like streams of fireflies. My chest rose and fell in measured breaths, but inside, the old wounds were ripping open. They had refused me once, laughed off my attempts to stand beside them. And now they were calling me. I called her back the next morning. Her tone was cautious, almost fragile, like she expected me to slam the door she had once shut in my face. Could we come see you?" she asked. 2 days later, they arrived. I'll never forget the way my parents looked as they stepped into my office. Mom clutched her worn handbag tightly against her chest, her eyes darting around the space like she couldn't believe she belonged there. Dad's shoulders were stooped, his face tired and lined with more years than he should have carried. The lobby itself was enough to make them pause. The glass elevator, the artwork on the walls, modern pieces I had chosen myself, the way the receptionist greeted me as Ms. Evans, with a respectful nod. When we entered my office, Mom gasped softly. The floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with sunlight, the city stretching endlessly beyond us. A wall of bookshelves displayed design awards, framed contracts, even a few personal touches, like Grandma's silver locket resting in a shadow box. The polished oak desk gleamed beneath the soft glow of a pendant lamp. Dad's eyes traveled across the room, pausing at the framed photograph of my team. 10 smiling faces, a family I had built for myself. He cleared his throat, but no words came out. Finally, Mom whispered, "Charlotte, is this all yours?" I let the silence stretch just a little longer, savoring the moment. For years, I had imagined this. Imagined them finally seeing me, not as the girl who wasn't enough, but as the woman I had become. Yes, I said evenly. Every piece of it. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Dad shifted uncomfortably, his hands tightening around his cane. I didn't realize, his voice cracked. I didn't realize you were doing so well. I leaned back in my chair, the leather cool against my shoulders. Of course you didn't. I never told you. Their faces told me everything. The disbelief, the shame, the quiet awe. My parents, who had once dismissed my help as childish and unnecessary, were now standing in a space built entirely from the strength of the daughter they underestimated. Mom finally spoke again, her voice breaking. We need you, Charlotte. Your father's medical bills, it's more than we can handle. For a moment, I closed my eyes, steadying myself. The air was heavy with irony. The very girl they had told to focus on her studies now had the power to keep them afloat. When I opened my eyes, I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let them see the full weight of who I was now, not bitter, not broken, but undeniably strong. They weren't just meeting their daughter that day. They were meeting the woman they had forged through rejection, the woman who no longer begged for a seat at their table. And the look on their faces told me they finally understood. The silence after my parents' plea lingered like smoke in the air. I could see the desperation in my mother's eyes, the quiet shame in my father's posture. For a moment, the younger version of me, the girl clutching an envelope of crumpled bills, wanted to cave, to rush forward and promise I'd fix everything. But the woman I had become knew better. I folded my hands on the desk, keeping my voice steady. I'll help, I said slowly, but not without conditions. Mom blinked. Conditions? Yes. I leaned forward, meeting both of their gazes. For years, I tried to be part of this family. I tried to help, and you refused me. Now you're here because you have no choice but to rely on me. That means things need to change, starting today. Dad shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't argue. Maybe the exhaustion in his eyes had softened him. First, I continued, no more pretending problems don't exist. If you need help, you ask for it without pride getting in the way. Silence nearly ruined us once. I won't let it happen again. Mom lowered her gaze, nodding faintly. Second, I said firmly, you respect me. My decisions, my career, my life. No more brushing me off like a child who doesn't understand the world. I've built this life from the ground up, and I expect acknowledgement, not dismissal. Dad exhaled heavily, the sound rough, like gravel breaking loose. You're right, he admitted quietly. I softened my tone, but not my stance. And third, if I'm going to cover Dad's medical bills, then you both need to take better care of yourselves. That means healthier habits, regular checkups, therapy if necessary. I won't pour money into fixing the same mistakes over and over. The words landed heavily, but instead of anger, I saw something unexpected in my mother's expression. Relief. As if someone had finally spoken aloud the things she was too afraid to say. Mom's voice trembled when she answered. We can do that, Charlotte. We will try. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift entirely. I was no longer the girl begging for their approval. I was the woman setting the terms, holding the power, but still choosing compassion. I stood, walking toward the shadow box on my shelf. Inside, Grandma's silver locket glimmered softly under the light. I touched the glass gently. Build it so strong they can't ignore it. Her words carried me even now. Turning back to my parents, I spoke with calm finality. I will take care of the bills. I'll make sure you're both okay. But this time, it's on my terms. If you want my help, then you accept not just my success, but my boundaries. Dad's lips pressed together, pride warring with gratitude. Finally, he gave a small nod. Understood. Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't smile, not yet. Because this wasn't about gratitude. It was about respect. For the first time in my life, I felt it settling into the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The girl they once refused was now the woman setting the rules. And for once, they listened. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had expected. At first, my parents stumbled through the changes. My father resisted doctor's orders, grumbling about his diet and medications. My mother, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over without addressing the real issues. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, they began to shift. I saw Dad walk outside in the mornings, taking slow but steady steps with his cane. I caught Mom reading articles on nutrition, scribbling recipes into a notebook she once reserved for grocery lists. They even started calling me, not for money but simply to ask about my day, my work, my life. It wasn't perfect. The years of silence and rejection couldn't be erased overnight. But for the first time, effort was being made. One evening, after a long meeting, I returned to my office. The city glittered beneath the windows, and on my desk sat a small package. My assistant explained it had been dropped off earlier by my parents. Inside was my grandmother's silver locket, the same one I had encased in the shadow box. This time, though, there was a note. In my mother's delicate handwriting, it read, "You were right, Charlotte. Stronger than we ever imagined. Thank you for teaching us." I held the locket in my palm, the cool metal pressing into my skin, and for a moment I felt like that 21-year-old girl again, hurt, invisible, clutching at scraps of hope. But now, I also felt the weight of the woman I had become. Independent, resilient, whole. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't the bitter kind I once shed. These were warm, releasing, a sign of healing I hadn't thought possible. I placed the locket back around my neck, letting it rest against my collarbone where it belonged. My grandmother's words whispered once more in my mind, "Build it so strong they can't ignore it." She was right. My parents once refused my help. They dismissed my worth, silenced my voice, and shut the door on my efforts.
But now they relied on me.
And not just for survival, but for guidance, for strength, for the very foundation they once doubted I could build. I walked toward the window, the city lights flickering like tiny promises of tomorrow. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger toward them. I felt something far more powerful.
Peace.
I spoke aloud, softly, as if my voice carried over the skyline itself. They may have refused me once, but now, they'll never ignore me again.